Okay, welcome. This is the first interview we're doing, which is with Leslie Smith, who's a qualified and licensed Australian migration agent. And for you watching this at home, you're obviously interested in what is the migration process, how does it work, and yeah, we're going to find out some information about that. So, welcome, Leslie.
Good morning. How are you?
Very good. So I guess the key thing is that when people are looking to migrate to Australia, it's not as simple as simply get a job and jump on a plane and get here.
No.
And to get something that's going to be a long-term process, there's a number of different ways people can actually apply for the migration. You said there's 4 different categories, I guess, of sponsorship, would you call it?
Yeah, there's 4 different types of visa categories that would allow a person to work in Australia.
Okay.
So there are a number that are sponsored.
Yep.
And there are a number of people that can apply independently.
Yep.
But when the visa is granted, that will give them the full work rights to be in Australia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we could just run through quickly each one of those 4. So you
Sure.
meant with the sponsorship ones. Talk us about through them.
So there is a temporary application that can be made,
Yep.
and that is where there is an Australian business that is willing to sponsor a skilled person from overseas.
Yes.
So they obviously have to have the right qualification and they have to have the right demonstrated work experience.
Yes.
That's a temporary visa, and it can last from 3 months up to 4 years.
Okay.
So the person would arrive in Australia, start working for the business, and then there are visa options from that temporary visa to gain permanently.
Yeah.
But where an applicant is overseas currently and wishes to come, they can be unsponsored.
Yes.
And in the unsponsored categories, they would apply through the General Skilled Migration Program.
Okay.
So we have a temporary situation on a 457 visa, the
Yep.
subclass 457, that allows them to come and work. And the other 2 sponsored categories are both permanent residency applications.
Okay.
They can be made when the person is here in Australia,
Yep.
or they can be made directly from overseas.
Okay.
Both of those visas are called employer nomination, which is an Australian company recognise the person they've not met before, or they may have just had a general interview, they've looked at the person's work experience, their qualifications, say, you're the right candidate for the job.
Yeah.
So in those 4 categories, one is general skilled, which goes through a process and a points system,
Yeah.
whereas the other ones are not points tested, they just have to meet the basic criteria.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So, just to recap for me, because I know you covered a few there.
Sure.
We've got the independent. So, is there 2 independent ones, or is just?
There's generally there is an independent skilled migration application that can be made.
Yep.
It can be sponsored by the state, doesn't have to be sponsored by a company.
Yep.
And it can also be sponsored by an eligible relative.
Yeah.
And that goes through the General Skilled Migration Program, which is points tested, and that
Yep.
is permanent residency.
Okay.
The
And so
other-
is that one? That's one category.
Yes, so
Is the
that's
independent?
general
Yep.
skilled migration falls into that skilled migration pathway.
Yep.
Sponsored by the state or a family member, or independently with no sponsorship.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then out of the other 3,
They're all
there's
sponsored by an Australian business. You need an Australian company to sponsor you for the other 3,
Yeah.
the temporary and the 2 permanent.
Okay. Excellent. So I hope that was clear for you. We'll be able to put the notes underneath as well, so you can check that out. So how long does it take? I mean, obviously it must be different for each category, but someone's in another country watching this video, and you're thinking, great, I want to live in Australia, I want to work in Australia. How long can the whole process take to get these visas approved?
So for the temporary 457 visa, it's
Yeah.
very, very quick.
Yeah.
Probably the maximum time that they would be waiting is about 6 weeks to
Okay.
approval. On the employer nomination visa, which is sponsored by an Australian company, that is a process that takes between 6 to 9 months.
Okay.
The regional sponsored migration program, which is the other sponsored category, that's a quick turnaround. That's about 4 months processing to permanent residency.
Okay.
And in the general skilled migration program, that's the points tested program, that can take 12 to 24 months.
Right. So out of these, which do you think is the most popular category that applies to most people watching this? Would be like, what's the ideal visa? I guess most people are looking at the permanency.
Yes.
But what's the easiest pathway for someone at home watching this going, great, what's the next step? Which one should I apply for?
I think ultimately if a person has the right qualifications and background and experience,
Yep.
then they should really be looking, if that's their ultimate goal, is to settle here, would be to apply for one of the permanent categories. The temporary 457, the only real beauty that I see in that program is it allows the person to come to work in Australia with an Australian business and make sure that it's the right cultural fit for them. So it's sort of trying and testing the water, testing their skills, seeing if they, enjoy working in this environment. And it is a massive change coming from another country to Australia if a person's never been before. So maybe that temporary allocation gives them that opportunity to have a good look around, see if this is what they really want to do, and then they can apply from Australia for a further permanent visa once they're here.
Okay. And for, I think an important thing, certainly I know, is your ability to speak the English language. I know there's some tests involved with that, but that's actually a critical step, isn't it?
It is. English language, in the Department of Immigration's recent release, they're highlighting very much on English language requirement. And predominantly, obviously, if you're from an English-speaking background, from the UK, US of A, Canada, you never needed to provide that English testing before. However, because the points system is quite complex now, what we're finding is that the higher the level of English, then obviously the easier the process is. International English language testing systems are available worldwide, where applicants can go and sit for that examination, test their ability. If they don't meet the required level of points that they need for the visa category, then they've obviously got the opportunity, they can resit as many times as they wish. The other thing is, of course, coming from an overseas country, there are a lot of highly educated applicants with degree level or masters. Sometimes they do not require to be tested in English because of their high level of qualification, and that the actual provision of that particular academic degree or master's was already given to them in English language, the instruction for that particular study. So there are other parameters where we don't necessarily need to test, but obviously the higher the level of English, the better.
Okay, excellent. And as far as the application fees involved, what kind of support does someone who's looking to migrate to Australia get from their employer? Like, does the employer pay these fees, or how does that work?
Essentially, in most cases where it is a sponsored visa, then the Australian businesses are the ones that pay those fees. The only fees that the applicant would be asked to pay, obviously because it's too difficult, is for their character testing, so police clearances, their medicals, and their translation of documentation.
And the other thing is, it's really important to be working with a local licensed Australian migration agent rather than talking to someone in your own country. Can you explain why that is?
There are lots of migration agents spread across the world who are registered Australian migration agents. And there are obviously agents overseas who are not licensed. And what we have found is that regardless of which country it is that you're looking to migrate from to Australia, we find that the Australian registered migration agents locally here, we get the information so much faster. So legislation, policy, any changes to the system, we're on it because we get it firsthand. I assume that a lot of people would say, well, why can't I do my application myself? Why do I have to use a migration agent? There is absolutely nothing to stop anybody from applying. However, it is complex. Legislation is quite daunting. And to make sure that your application gets processed quickly, then using a migration agent is going to ensure that it is smooth running, and that we can answer legislatively back to a case officer if there's any queries. So
and you wouldn't want to get it wrong, would you?
No, because you're spending a lot of time and effort and energy, both from the agent's perspective and obviously from the applicant, to get that process done and get it done as smoothly and as quickly as possible.
Okay, cool. And as far as the way that it works with Jobs Australia, I think a concern is, will a licensed migration agent look over my application personally, or am I just a number in the system? What's the process?
With our process, effectively every single application will be reviewed. It will be reviewed by myself. I am a registered agent. I have over 10 years work experience in this field. Every person is treated you know, with the utmost respect,
Yep.
with the highest confidentiality, which is extremely important,
Yep.
particularly when we're dealing with websites and internets and
Yep.
emails. So it's really, really imperative that I review every single person's application, their qualifications,
Yep.
and assess their eligibility.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so they're definitely not a number.
Yeah, no, that's good. Well, I'm sure that gives a lot of people watching this a fair bit of comfort in knowing how the process works. Well, yeah, I think that's it. We'll wrap it up there. If you do have any other questions that you'd like to ask Leslie or any more information, certainly send that through and we'll be able to cover that in other videos. But for now, we'll wrap it up and thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks for the time this morning.